This recording is now in progress. Well, yeah, so thanks for coming along. Obviously, you're both new to these Breakfast Club meetings. Essentially, the premise is on the last Wednesday of every month, I'll be presenting on a different topic. So I've been doing this about a year now. Last topics have included investing for children. Last one I did was actually on cryptocurrency, believe it or not, which is really interesting. Tax planning, where to start investing, analysis of different platforms. We did actually give an analysis of Nutmeg on that one, actually, funny enough, Karen. So yeah, it'd be rotating, free to come, invite your friends and family along to the next one if you wanted to, if you find this one useful. But obviously today's all going to be around behavioural finance. So the psychology that we have when looking to choose different investments. Perhaps you've had investments before that have gone wrong, and therefore what biases come into play there. And it's all about looking at our intuitive and reflective minds. So obviously you two both working in the finance world already, so it'd be kind of used to these types of things, I suppose. So I do want it to be, two-way. I don't want to be talking at you guys for an hour. So please just, butt in, ask lots of questions. Let's turn this into more of a discussion. Normally I don't use PowerPoints, but I think because this is quite a heavy topic, I've got a few to go through. So why don't you both quickly introduce yourselves? Obviously, you know you, Dash, already from Karen. We used to work together way back when. Love to know what brought you here today, and any questions, anything you want covering off specifically. It doesn't even have to be related to behavioural finance. It could be anything. Obviously, finance related. so Dash, why don't you go first?
I'm here basically today because I want to understand what clients, because I work on the other side where I deal with financial advisors. I kind of want to understand what clients are really saying. I don't get to talk to clients at the end of the day, and you do, David. So I thought that would be really useful, and the kind of topics in the way that you're engaging clients as well, because then I can help support that from a sales perspective, but also from a personal perspective for myself.
What are clients saying? Yeah. Yeah, I think the most questions I get is, right, well, where shall I be placing my money now? That's the main one. It's funny because the reason why I even decided to start, I've got someone else coming in now. The reason why I even decided to start these breakfast meetings was I had a chat with a good friend of mine last summer. He is a chartered accountant, works for KPMG, or did do. He's now a financial consultant. And I go to him, right, well, over a few beers, where's your money at the moment? I don't know how we got into that conversation. Our conversations are a lot more fun than that usually. He's like, I've got some money with Nutmeg, Karen. I have absolutely no idea what it all means. And so it was almost like a kind of a light bulb moment there. I was like, here's this man, chartered accountant, and doesn't know diddly squat in terms of where it's invested, what it's doing, or anything really. So I guess that was huge for me. Clients don't really tend to know, even if they're in the industry, what the hell is going on. And so it's more just trying to educate them as much as possible, and hence the purpose of these. So topics to engage clients with, I suppose, you really just need to go back to basics with them. Keep things really simple. And obviously there needs to be an element of trust there as well. They need to know that what you're talking about is correct. But that's the main question I get, especially with the pandemic. Who knows where to invest? I mean, last year it was American tech. Do you want to be in American tech now? No, because it's so highly overpriced, expensive. Perhaps you want to go into more value-based stocks, like the travel industry, for example. Value stocks, by the way, for those that don't know, just kind of cheaper stocks, underpriced. So those are the kind of conversations that I've been having predominantly, certainly over the last few months. But yeah. Cover a bit more of those questions off later on. Karen, over to you. Any kind of specific questions, topics?
I guess I'm, as you know, been a product manager in different finance companies.
Yeah.
And then I guess interested, in where it's all going in the market, but then also I guess what I should be doing as well. So, how can I improve on what I'm doing? Like, should I be having multiple, do I think about Nutmeg and Money Farm and, some of the other ones, or, is it better just to have it all in one kind of thing? And then, I don't know, if we cover pensions and, should I be trying to consolidate on my pensions? So I guess I want to know from the customer point of view in terms of the product and where we're going in the market industry, but also just on a selfish point as well. If you've got anything that way as well, I'm also interested that way.
I mean, look, it's preference really. If you want to have your money on different platforms, make sure that the platform is doing slightly different thing, because Nutmeg is all passive investments.
Yep.
So you might want to find a platform that actually specializes in active. Do you know the difference between the two? Or obviously, I assume you do working in that industry,
yep.
Karen, but I don't want to
yep.
assume anything here. Yeah, fine. But of course, do bear in mind that you can only have one. If you're talking about ISAs, for example, on these platforms, you can only have one stocks and shares ISA in tax year.
Yeah.
So you can't be opening multiple ones, but certainly in the preceding tax year, why not go on to someone like, you mentioned Money Farm there. I'm not actually familiar with Money Farm, forgive me.
They're very simple. It's very similar to Nutmeg.
Yeah.
They started off in Italy and then they've expanded into Europe.
There's loads out there.
Yeah.
I use Hargreaves Lansdown, really good.
Yeah.
Really good platform. It's up to you really. For pensions though, obviously I would say in kind of 9 out of 10 cases it's always worth consolidating.
Yeah.
Mainly because you want all your pensions in one place, don't you? Don't want to be going to every single provider asking for information, and you don't know what funds they're in or values they're in. And if you're leaving one company, they might decide to put your money in cash or very low yielding funds. So always worthwhile consolidating. But I think for those questions, Karen, if that's okay, we'll probably take that out of this session because it's not really on the topic of today, but perhaps we'll have a one-to-one and talk about that further if you wanted to.
Yep, sounds great. Thanks.
Great. Okay. And lastly or not, Christine, have I got that? Are you there? I think you're on mute. Testing, Christine? Okay, we'll leave it there then. Right, so let's get cracking then, because I've got a few slides to go through.
Sorry, my bad. I thought you were looking for someone else. It's Christiane.
Oh, Christiane, sorry.
That's okay.
Christiane, sorry, apologies.
And I looked at the list and I thought, oh, okay, must be me. Sorry, what was the question?
What you here today? Any questions?
I'm just interested in. I'm just interested in becoming a bit more financially literate, to be fair. I'm still quite early on in my career. I'm a trainee solicitor. So I'm interested in just knowing how to make good decisions with my money moving forward. Yeah, that's it really.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks so much for coming along. You missed the first bit there, Christiane. So
I'm going to find a link.
Sorry. So just as a quick overview, I'll be running these sessions on a monthly basis. So they happen on the last Wednesday of each month. Lots of new topics will come out the woodwork, but today predominantly is just on behavioural finance. So looking at the psychology of our investment decisions, why we act in certain ways, and looking at our intuitive mind versus our reflective mind.
Okay,
and how we become aware of these, and therefore some tools and techniques to combat these as well. So looking at the kind of the biases that tend to show up. So without further ado, I have said an hour there, so we've got about 45 minutes left. Right, here we go. Let me try and share my screen with you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to see these slides. Right, hopefully, can you see that okay? Oh, hang on, I haven't shared it yet. I love these Zoom sessions. Right, can you all see this presentation here? Yeah, fantastic. Right, so what are we doing here? Well, fundamentally, I'm trying to understand how the mind operates in the investment decision-making process. And as I said, how to disarm these biases that we have. So setting the scene a little bit here. So we're then going to go into some frameworks into how we can combat particular biases that might be coming up, especially in our lives. And we have biases that govern pretty much our decisions every day of our lives, every minute of our lives. We might not even know it. These might be unconscious biases, a lot of them are. But it's also quite unlikely that we're going to find a cure-all solution for these biases, given that it makes a deep part of our makeup and who we are as human beings. However, I'd like to introduce some new ideas that take into account the psychological tendencies. So we may be able to lessen the impact of these biases and therefore miss kind of certain pitfalls. So as I said earlier, do we have a logical or rational view when it comes to investing? What's logical to one person might not be to another. We are all different. So question to you guys, do you think we act rational and logical when it comes to investing?
I would say no, personally, because working on the side that I do with financial advisors, even advisors switched out of investments last March and into cash. And when markets recovered, they were then rushed to kind of switch back in. And these are people that are quite experienced in the industry. And I'm sure they've seen markets go up and down quite a lot in their career. But
yeah. And of course, they then would have missed out from the upswing. Yeah, definitely. Karen? Any thoughts on that? Do you think we act logical or rational? Or Christiane?
Yeah, I don't think we do. I think there's still emotion. I think, and I know like people take their money out when they shouldn't, right? Sometimes they just get stressed. They see the market goes down, so then they, act without thinking really through the longer term impact of that. And I guess also when it goes up, they also act irrationally as well. They kind of will make a rash decision without looking at the longer term impact of what they're doing.
Yeah, emotion plays into it massively, doesn't it? Yeah. And finally, Christiane, any thoughts? Do you think we act rational? Are you logical or rational in everything you do? I'm sure.
No, I agree with everyone else. I think investing is risky in its nature. So when you get into investing, I don't know if logic and rationality comes in play in a risky in something that you're doing that's quite risky. You can even see with what happened recently with the crash. So yeah,
indeed, yeah. And I'm sure the pandemic that we're in now, huge amounts of emotions have come into play in terms of, as I was trying to explain earlier, how do I put my money now? Should I just keep it all in cash? We had obviously, as Darcy was saying, the crash in March last year. Well, if you held your investments, you would have made your money back within a month or two, especially if you had American stocks. And then some. But of course, if you're doing what Darcy's saying and say, well, put money in cash, then you crystallized your losses and then avoiding any upswing. So this plays into account even with so-called professionals in our industry. So those biases are massive. There's a huge pull on us in terms of what we do. So I'm not going to go through these points bits by bit. If you guys can read those, but just to give a bit of a flavour of what we'll be covering off today. And just to highlight this point even further, a chap called Howie Markovich, hopefully I've pronounced his name right, father of kind of modern portfolio theory, bases assumptions from the fact that actually investors are rational, even though quite clearly, as we've discussed, perhaps they're not. That is, we have little difficulty making financial decisions which are well-informed, careful, and consistent. That we are not confused by all the information presented to us, and we will make informed, rational investment decisions without being easily swayed by emotional and psychological influences. But I don't think that's the case, as we've just said. But however, the reason why I bring that up is theories based on these assumptions make it very easy for investment specialists to develop theoretical structures to support what they do using computer-based analytical tools. So me as a financial advisor will use a system to work out what a client's attitude to risk is and capacity for loss. Okay, very clever system called Dynamic Planner. But that is all theory. You know, you've got a bunch of questions asking you a load of questions. I'm trying to get you to write out a load of answers. And then it will come and throw out, right, well, Dash is therefore a 7 out of 10. Brilliant. Okay, well, do we really want to go down that route? And then that obviously has to lead on to some sort of open discussion, and that will obviously be evolving and changing over time, but you get my point. So these assumptions, as we've already discussed, do not really match the reality of investor logic and determination. And it's really only in the last 25 to 30 years that behavioral finance and economics has really kind of taken off in this respect. So then on to the next slide. This is what I was talking about in regards to our intuitive and reflective mind. And in 2002, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize for contributions to behavioral economics. And he said that every important decision we make is based on intuition. That forms the cornerstone of any decision-making process. He said that each of us behaves using the intuitive and the reflective mind. So the intuitive is knowing someone's going to be a really good friend when you first meet him or her. That gut feeling approach, first impressions. I'm sure you had a first impression of me when I first sat down here with this weird background scheme behind me. That is the most powerful part of our brain. And then we've got the reflective mind. So the more analytical approach. Now, this is the area that us as advisors try and engage in with clients. Yeah. Look at all these logical reasons why you should be going into a certain investment. But in actual fact, our clients acting more on emotion. So we might use tools such as I say, risk profile, capacity for loss, term, all these things will play into that. And so getting the reflective mind to actually go ahead and work in a way that we want it to work can obviously be difficult because the intuitive mind often overrides that. And it's this flaw in the intuitive mind thinking that can lead to some practical examples, which I'm going to go into next. So here we go. Oh, no, we've gone past the slide here. Sorry. Over to you guys. Which line's bigger, longer? Top or bottom? Shut them out.
They're both the same.
They're both the same. Well done. Top of the class. However, it does lead to a point in terms of how the intuitive mind can be misled. Right? But what's even stronger in this point is that even though we know that they're both the same side, and our intuitive mind knows the truth, that the intuitive mind still does not want to believe it. When I look at that, I still want to think the second line is longer than the first one. Yeah. So the intuitive mind therefore overrides the reflective mind to see the lines in this particular way. What happens then is that people themselves, when getting presented with irrefutable fact, can still think, well, no, you're wrong. So decisions and arguments in these kind of scenarios, and I'm sure you can probably think about some in your lives, become pointless and futile, even when you've got evidence that backs up what you're trying to say. Why do I say all this? Well, human beings, therefore, can become susceptible to cognitive illusions, which are referred to, as I say, biases, which are effectively mental shortcuts. Yeah, I've got another one here. Which one would you prefer? 90% fat meat, or sorry, not 90% fat-free meat, or contains 10% fat?
I think most people probably go for the contains 10% because the number's lower.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Look, this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek example, or again, another one of these biases. So negative connotation to contains fat, which in marketing economic terms is known as framing. And marketers use it all the time. But what this does show is that we are not perhaps as rational as we might think, because they are both exactly the same. Yeah. But it's not irrationality in the normal sense of the word that I'm kind of talking about here, but rather than, again, we are depending on the intuitive mind to form most of the decisions that we make in day-to-day lives, thus making us susceptible to shortcuts when the reflective mind should be the order of the day. So anyone read that book, The Chimp Paradox? Really, really good book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Kind of goes into this area a lot more detail. Darren Brown famously talked about the system 1 versus system 2 brain. So the system 1 brain is what happens if you get in an argument with your partner or get into a fight and you say something you regret, and 2 minutes later your system 2 brain is slowing down and going, oh bloody hell, I shouldn't have said that. That's very similar to what's going on here. Any thoughts on any of that so far? Do you agree with what I've just said, or any kind of real life examples? Definitely silence. Okay, let's carry on.
I think what you're saying makes sense, but in terms of how you convince a client to invest money at this time, how do you overcome that, I guess, for yourself and for a client, really? Yeah,
no, definitely. That's what we'll come on to in a bit. So next slide then. Here we go. This image here, does this resonate with anyone who may have investments or had investments in the past? The idea of just following people like sheep and falling off the cliff even though it's a bad idea. This is something known as herd bias, which is so strong and powerful and hard to deny, and which often leads to overconfidence. If anyone's ever invested into cryptocurrency, which is the newest phase that's going in at the moment, I was certainly part of this back in 2017, just when it just started kicking off, and I thought, oh, this is brilliant. You know, this will continue. So I've got my dog. This is going to continue forever. You know. And then, of course, the bubble crashed and wiped out most, if not all, of my investments. But I thought, this is going to continue. Herd bias, I'm going to follow what everyone else is doing, even though I don't really know what it all means, to the point where the bubble collapsed. But what this leads to people going into is plunging into rising markets and then fleeing when markets start to fall. And it seduces us to start thinking that anyone can, quote unquote, beat the market. And there's an interesting study over in America that showed that average investors turned over their portfolios, i.e. changed the funds that they had. If they changed their portfolios 70% of the time of each year, transaction costs reduced the returns to 3.7% compared to the market as a whole. And in the top quartile of people that were constantly chopping and changing their funds, that actually resulted into a 7.3% reduction. So there's all these people out there thinking, right, yeah, we'll keep changing the funds that we're in or the stocks that we're in to try and beat the market. Well, in actual fact, unless you get lucky or really know what you're doing, it might actually be provide negative results. So this is all kind of going into the whole fear and greed biases and influences, and there's a strong impulse of creating, I suppose, investor ill discipline, which is then becomes underpinned by this overconfidence. And this, as I was trying to explain earlier, talking about earlier, leads to emotional buying. And there was obviously, you guys know who Warren Buffett is, one of the top investors there's ever been. He wrote in his chairman's letter, and I quote, "Investors should remember that excitement and their expenses are their enemies." So investors should remember that excitement and their expenses are their enemies. And if they insist on trying to time their participation in equities, they should be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful. Yeah. So again, coming back to the kind of the crypto phase that we're in at the moment, and things are at the top and going high, and people are earning 10, 20, 30, 40, hundreds of %. That's really when you need to be getting out of the market. You know, when your hairdresser down the road is talking about Bitcoin and things like that, that's probably when you should be getting out of the market. And the same goes for normal stocks as well. So I mentioned earlier, American tech. Do you really want to be going into American tech now? Companies like Facebook, Amazon, Google, or what's known as in the industry FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google, when really they're so overpriced. Will they continue going up? Probably, to be honest, because we're working from home and there's a need for those kind of services. What about buying stocks or funds or shares that are devalued? Again, greedy when others are fearful. So the perfect time to buy, going back to Darsh's point earlier, was actually probably beginning of April last year. The markets have fell by 30%. But of course, even the financial advisors put a lot of their clients' money into cash. It's actually probably the worst thing to do at that point. You need to put money in cash when things are at the top. Anyway, so again, question to you guys: has any of you kind of bought high and sold low in the markets? Has that ever happened?
I started off with Vanguard ISA, but I was a bit nervous to do it straight after the crash. So I probably did it May time. So I missed out on 2 months of growth, and I was like, no, why did I do that? At the right time, but I was nervous to, you know, to invest my cash in. So I waited a little bit, probably longer than I should.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. And Karen? Christiane?
No.
No.
What was the question?
Have you ever well, if you've ever bought your own individual stocks or gone onto some sort of investment platform, have you ever bought high or sold low? Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever gone through that horrible process?
I haven't, no, because I've only been using the ones that do it for you. So I don't actually know what's being bought or sold for me unless I look, but I still don't really understand.
So you're not familiar with that horrible pain so far. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you.
No, not yet. I've only seen other people suffer like that, but no personal experience just yet. Yeah,
it's not a great feeling. I mean, I'm going to put my hand on my heart and say I've done it. You know, I do trade myself, and I think we're all susceptible to it. Again, this emotional bias is so strong when you think, I know what I'm doing compared to everyone else, you know, and you can just become so eluded with that. But also we can also look at kind of in the news stocks. Yeah, so investors react to what they hear rather than reflecting what they're being told. So obviously social media will have a big drag on us as well. Every time I scroll through my Instagram, I'm always seeing people trying to sell get rich quick schemes and all these, you know, weird and wacky investments, and that can also kind of cloud our judgment. We had the GameStop saga last year, if you guys know what happened there. Did you hear about the GameStop situation?
No, it was this year, wasn't it?
Was it this year? Was it last year? I think it started. I thought it started. Maybe it was this year. Maybe it was this year. Yeah. Do you guys know what happened there? So effectively, what happened was the hedge funds shorted the stock, as in betted for that stock to go down. So if the stock value fell in price, they would have made money. But what happened was that this big social forum and lots of people piled in and said, right, well, let's buy that stock and inflate the price. Hence, the hedge funds and the powers that be were left with a terrible position because they were losing money hand over fist. And that is in essence what happened. But then, of course, what happened then was it all made the news. And it all got on social media and it got on the TV, and then people, even one of my best friends bought in. And then, of course, the inevitable crash happened, and then they lost all their money. So again, in that scenario, what's going on there? Are people investing rationally, or are they investing irrationally and using their emotions? My guess is the latter. But that's just one prime example of what's happened recently. It's just something to be wary of. Try not to be overcome by what's said in the news too much. You know, more often than not, if a company has been spoken about on the FT or any kind of newspaper, that stock is probably going to be overpriced because it's known about, because it's been spoken about. Lots of other people are probably buying that company. Something to consider. But anyway, let's move on. How long we got? 20 minutes left. So, two things to talk about on this slide. The first key one is what's called loss aversion. Does anyone know what I mean by loss aversion? So in investing terms, basically, if you make a loss of £100, that feeling is twice as great, twice as strong as the same equal size gain. Does that make sense? So if I was to lose £100 rather than gain £100, that feeling of losing £100 would be twice as great. And that's what's known as loss aversion. Now, there was some testing done on this, funnily enough. I think a Yale economist called M. Keith Chan, I think it was, did some preference testing with monkeys. So what he did is right, well, the result is they would always end up with a piece of apple. So that was the end result. However, they used two different ways of ending up with that one piece of apple. Okay, so the one way was they had two pieces of apple and they had one taken away. And the other, they had no pieces of apple and they had one given to them. Which one do you think the monkeys preferred? The first one or the second one?
Second one.
The second one. Exactly. The monkeys got extremely agitated when they lost that piece of apple. And that just goes to show why our deposition towards loss is so strong. And it affects a lot of our investment making decisions. And it's very important when this comes into risk profiling, which again is something that we do a lot as advisors. Selling, also, if you've ever had to sell an investment at a loss, I know I have, you just don't want to do it because you don't want to wake up to that very uncomfortable scenario that you're in. If I sell now, I've made a loss. I'm just going to ignore that. I hope it goes away. And it's this kind of mental accounting that plays in rather than having a look at the whole picture. what that loss aversion then does, it leads on to what's called inertia, which is effectively reluctance to do something even though it's in your own best interest to do it. Because their focus, rather than doing what they should do, is doing, well, actually, I might make a loss. And it's very difficult to counter. So doing the right things, i.e. saving for retirement, exercising, eating well. They know it's a good thing to do, but they don't want to do it right now and they keep putting it off. That's what I mean by inertia, i.e. procrastination. And that becomes even stronger if that person has experienced a loss in the past, especially if they've received advice on that loss recently. So if they received a loss last year, are they going to want to be getting advice from me who tells them to stick their money somewhere? They might do, but that fear, that bias is going to be even stronger. And that's something that we need to be wary of. Happy with all that so far? Please, any thoughts, questions, fire out as we go along. Is this all kind of hopefully resonating with you guys so far? Karen and Christiane, I can't see your faces, so I don't know if you're nodding or whatever, but I imagine you're nodding along, yes?
Yes, it's all making sense.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. So how do we combat this? Well, Dash, you might know about this. There was something developed in the States called the SMART solution, which basically stands for the SM&T, standing for Save More Tomorrow program. And what this does, it's based around investors' biases to the inertia, the loss aversion, and immediate gratification. This is what the three biases that they're trying to combat. So how can we ensure that investor theories therefore work together? So what they essentially did, so the SMART program was based around people's contributions to pension schemes over in the States, and invited people to do three things to tackle these psychological biases. First thing was, employees were invited to pre-commit to increase savings at some point in the future. So they had to pre-commit to an increase in their contributions at some point in the future. Okay. This, the participants apparently found easy to accept because it overcame that procrastination, that inertia. Yeah, because we know it's the right thing to do and it's going to happen in the future. Brilliant, tick. The second thing was they linked savings increase to their contribution increases to the increase in pay. This meant that this avoids the whole loss aversion because I'm earning more. So therefore my contribution will go up. And this contribution was also going to be set automatically. So again, overcoming the inertia part. The third thing they said was, right, well, brilliant, you're in a pension, it's automatically going to go up. Employees were also given the opportunity to leave whenever they wanted to leave, which is what we have today. And this, I guess, is helping to create the illusion of control, because in actual fact, will people want to leave their pension schemes? Probably not. But if you wanted to, you could opt out. So that's just an example of what's come into play over the last few years to help combat these biases in the industry. And such outstanding effects that this program made was that this quadrupled people's contributions from 3.5% to 13.6% of their salary over a 3-year period. So you can imagine what effect that would have made to people's pension savings later on down the line. I guess what this highlights is the fact that the right kind of psychology based in the investment world can dramatically improve outcomes. Even just small changes can dramatically improve outcomes. This slide again is just kind of highlights the whole loss aversion thing and saying that yes, loss aversion is greater if you've seen losses before. We could talk about the credit crunch, the current pandemic that we're in. But how can we overcome this? Like what tools do we have to overcome this loss aversion? Well, some people say it can be overcome by what's called fuzzy accounting or blurring the lines. There's prospect theory shows that they judge gains and losses with reference to a singular point in time. So did you lose money back in 2008 when the credit crunch hit? Or did you lose money then? If you can try and pinpoint that point of pain, point of reference, then that might be something to walk towards. So if that reference point can be identified easily and quickly, this makes it far more, the more significant it becomes in their thinking until it consumes their decision-making process. Because that reference point may well be their whole worldview, depending on how strong that loss was at the time. And this, if it's not dealt with correctly, might lead into kind of investor paralysis. I've lost 10% of my savings before. I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to put money into the markets. I'm just going to sit on cash and I'm done with it. So if you can try and think about, right, well, where has that come from? Because it would have come from somewhere, probably. Something to think about if that is resonating with you in any way. A few more slides to go. I know this is quite heavy stuff. The credit crunch. We all know what happened there. Hopefully. Question, Karen, Christine, Dash, do we all understand what happened to the credit crunch? Do we all know what went on there? Of course, it created quite a lot of psychological scarring.
I think the main fear was that a really large company went bust, and then since then people have been mistrusting of all companies. Then.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, companies like Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns. If you ever watched a film called The Big Short, highly recommend watching it if you wanted to. Really, kind of just explains what happens. It's actually quite an entertaining film. It's not boring. Karen, Christiane?
Yeah, I understand what happened generally anyway, in terms of a lot of mortgages were approved and given out even though there was no real backing for it, and eventually it just crashed.
Yeah. And what did you feel when that happened? Has that impacting your decisions now, do you think, or is that kind of in the past and well, actually no, not going to worry about that?
Personally, it hasn't affected me because I was actually quite young when it happened, so I didn't understand it at all. I've only been able to understand it in hindsight, having gone into my profession and seeing that this still affects a lot of people's decisions, and it has like changed a lot of laws and regulations around finance, because I'm in financial services right now. I'm trained in financial services, so I see the effect it's had on the industry in hindsight, but at the time I was too young to understand.
Yeah, brilliant. How old were you then when the credit crunch hit?
I was about 11. No, 12.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, quite young then. Yeah, I was just going into university, so to be honest, I didn't even know what was going on at the time. Honestly, I had no idea. I went to uni summer of 2007, and I was in such a bubble. Obviously, it affected me after trying to get a job, but at the time, no. Karen? Karen, you there? Okay, let's continue. But what the credit crunch did lead on to was records amount of cash sitting on the sidelines. You know, fear that this might happen again. But what this did do, however, and that the fear of the pandemic linked to the potential of the new investment dawn as bull markets rise again. So as I've been saying, when markets do crash and do fall, yes, it's terrible for jobs. See, a lot of people went homeless. However, as an investment time, that is probably the opportune time to actually go in. So what a lot of investors would have done is actually bought at the bottom back in the 2008, let's say. Richard Taylor said that we should be devising a plan that investors can actually implement to combat this, even when they're distracted by other temptations. So if you see the loss, obviously the intuitive mind will act in a powerful way. And if you've suffered the loss once, as I said, you're even more averse to future losses. So we need to be able to devise a plan in order to combat that. That's what we advisors try and do. So how can we combat that? What tools can we actually use? I love that. Trying to understand the behavior of some people is like trying to smell the color 9. How can we combat it? Well, we could be counteracted by multiple investments than just one. This in our industry is often called as pound cost averaging. So if you've got a lump sum of £10,000 and you want to put into an ISA, for example, do you want to put all that £10,000 in one go? You might want to. You might want to spread it over a number of years. What you are effectively then doing is taking advantage of potentially cheaper prices. And you are spreading the risk over that timescale. Does that make sense, guys? So rather than one big lump sum, invest little and often. It could be one way of doing it. So you can decide on advance the type of assets to use. You don't just have to go into equities, although generally speaking, in today's markets, that is the best yielding asset class there is currently. You could go into property, although I wouldn't advise on that at the moment, setting up commercial property funds. You've got things like bonds, commodities, and cash as well. I won't talk about what those asset classes mean at this point. Again, want to bring that into another session with me, you can do after this. As I explained before, in that SMART program, we could be agreeing on future increases and actually stick to that. We'll talk about diversification. So again, don't just hold all your money in one basket. So if you've got money within a fund on Nutmeg, for example, that's invested all in passive funds, maybe you want to have a bit of active in there. Maybe you want to have, again, some bond funds in there as well. Maybe you want to have a property portfolio. The more diverse you are, the less risky it is. Okay, so diversification is also key. And the fifth one, and I think that the best one actually, is holding cash. So whenever I talk to a client, the first things I need to do is work out if they've got an emergency fund. So it would generally be 3, if not 6 times their total expenses. Not saying they should invest that. However, if you've got some cash on the sidelines, let's go back to that 10 grand scenario. If you put in 2, well, then you've got 8 grand left to put in at that opportune time. Now, when is that opportune time? Who knows? No one's got a crystal ball. And as the saying goes, it's about time in the markets, not trying to time the markets. However, if you do have some cash left aside, that obviously gives you more opportunity to take advantage if the markets do fall by 10, 20%. Right, let's quickly go in. Yeah, let's put some money into that fund or that stock or share. And again, that's the kind of advice that you would get from someone like myself as time goes on. What this will then mean is that loss aversion is far less likely to kick in, isn't it? As the fund goes down, well, brilliant. I've got more money now to put into that fund, taking advantage of those cheap prices. And then what also happens is that intuitive mind is therefore not overly concerned. The rational mind loves the logical approach. The intuitive mind is going, yes, you're pleasing both sides of your brain. Brilliant. Happy days. But this all comes down to investor discipline. Obviously, this is very easier said than done. But again, part of the advice process. Does that make sense to everyone? There are a lot of kind of deep points in there. Again, just come to me after if you've got any burning questions. We are coming up to 9 o'clock, but we are on our final slide here. As I say, investor discipline, improved by pre-commitment. Yeah. So evidence-based actions rather than emotion, superstition, or fear. We want to try and engage ourselves and our clients to engage their reflective mind to pre-commit to a rational outcome, pre-commit to an investment plan. Which way otherwise, because otherwise that might trigger the kind of the rational, intuitive mind. So making commitments removes impulses to act in a certain way. You know, act on that social media post, act on that company that's been highlighted in the news, for example. And what I am here for is to be a guide and all that, to be a counsellor, to help you hold your nerve. So I sometimes say to clients, you know, the only thing you can plan for is a plan not going according to plan. You know, we can put a plan together and look all sexy and smart, but generally speaking, something's going to go wrong. And not all investments will work out. Not all investments need to be a gamble. Not all investments need to be risky. Certain times, in terms of where the market is, bonds, which is far safer than equities, might be the best option to go into. And not every investment is going to meet your objectives. That it's just not going to happen. Obviously, we want to try and increase the chance of that happening. But activity alone, I guess, does not guarantee success. In fact, overactivity, as I explained at the beginning of the workshop, might actually reduce returns. So it's actually sometimes better to stick to an investment strategy and just stick to it. Long-term investing, 10, 15, 20 years, choose investment strategy and just stick to it. Second step, often go through decide on a strategy that aligns with your risk, your timescales, your strategy, as I was explaining earlier, and get your buy-in from the clients. So I hope that's kind of made a little bit of sense to you guys, and had some food for thought there. Again, if you wanted to kind of go through any of these points with me in any greater detail, let me know. You've all got my details. You've all got my email address. Would love to book in, you know, quick 10, 20-minute call with you after this to see how you found it. Yeah, Dash, Karen, Christian, any last kind of thoughts? What did you think? Over to you guys.
I thought that was really useful. Thank you. And it's also, it's stuff that I know, but it's good to kind of go through a refresher of everything. And there's a few points there and lots of good quotes that I'm going to steal.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Great. Karen?
Yeah, lots of interesting comments and things to think about. Yeah, no, it's a really interesting session. Thank you.
Great. Any key takeaways or things you thought, actually, yeah, that's kind of resonated with me, or?
Yeah, I think as Dash said, you know, some things you know, but you just need to kind of put into practice and, you know, take on board a bit more. So yeah, and I think that's really helpful. Thanks.
Brilliant. Christian?
Yeah, I agree. I think my takeaway is that I'm going to be a lot more mindful of the two parts of my brain that are acting in my decision making. So just make sure I'm aware of what's happening to being a bit more mindful. Yeah,
Definitely try not to be overcome too much by that intuitive side, although, you know, it's very easy to say. I always do. it is just human nature, but it's just being wary of it, isn't it? So fantastic. Okay, guys. Well, listen, we'll finish it there. I will send a recording to you all, but it will be private. Don't worry, people won't be able to see it. If you wanted to come along, as I say, the next one is at the last Wednesday of July, which is 20th of July. If you want to come along, it'll be a completely different topic. I haven't thought of the topic yet. I will do over the next few weeks. Again, something finance related. And if you wanted to invite your friends, family along, that'd be great. Trying to build up really a community here, so we can all kind of learn together as things go on. But no, thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks.
And
Thank
see you
you.
later. Cheers, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks so
bye.
much. Bye.